Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to God's Plan, Your Part. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy 17 to 20, and one of the biggest questions we're going to be answering is, why is it so important that we don't look like everybody else? That's going to be like a key idea in this text. We'll get to that in a minute. But today when we look over chapter 17, there's interesting passages in 17 about kings, which I definitely want to talk about. 18 is going to be about priests and Levites and a prophet again. 19 is going to be about cities of refuge and manslaughter, which we've heard a lot about. And finally, stuff about war, which Mennonites don't love. So as we go over stuff, Jenny, what do you want to talk about? I hope you want to talk about something in 17 first.
I was going to say, I don't know if I really resonated a whole lot with 17, but now that you say that, I guess I feel like I have to find something. I don't know.
I basically was very awkwardly setting myself up to make sure we talked about 17.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So,
well, we did say right before the episode, it was interesting. Ryan had mentioned to me that we're starting to talk about kings and the rules or laws about kings and what they needed to do or not do. And I actually just kind of glossed over it. Surprise, surprise. But it's interesting because kings are not a thing for the Israelites at this point.
If you have the basic, this is probably like an old illustration now, but if you have like the very basic Sunday school flannel graph kind of Sunday school education, you have been trained to think like Israel was never supposed to have a king. Israel was never supposed to have a king. Why did they ask for a king? And then you're going to read Deuteronomy 17. You're going to be like, wait, what? Like God told them how to have a king?
Well, I think it's interesting because I would say the opposite. I feel like it was like we learned about creation. We learned about the walls coming down. And then boom, we're into like David.
Yeah.
So to me, it's been like a really chopped up lack of like many years in between kind of thing. So it's interesting because it was like, just stay true to the Lord. There is one God only. March yourself into these lands. Make sure that you're just like taking out the people that I tell you to left and right. Like they should have just followed plan A. But God knows that there's going to be a need for plan B and ultimately a plan C. So that's very interesting.
D and E and
I meant Jesus, but it's cool.
What's wild is Deuteronomy 17. I think it's a very important text to know if you want to like understand the full story of Scripture. God is going to lay out what it's like to have a godly king, which they're not even supposed to do.
Can you imagine though being an Israelite and be like, wait, what?
Yeah, like excuse me. But there's three things that stick out to me. They're not supposed to acquire many horses, and like the side note for that is don't even go to Egypt to get more horses. Don't gather up a ton of wives for yourself. And don't gather up a bunch of silver and gold for yourself. All the kings are going to do exactly those things. So
lots of cars, lots of girlfriends, lots of money.
David and Solomon are probably the kings that get the most attention by a lot. Both of them kind of flame out because they have tons of wives. God said they should never do that. They have a ton of wealth. God said they should never do that. I don't know what their horse count is. I don't have information on that, but I'm guessing they had a ton of those, and God said not to do that. So if you know Deuteronomy 17, even when we get into those passages about developing kings, you're going to be like, wait, they were never supposed to live this way. So that's an interesting passage to me. What do you want to talk about next?
I think something that popped out to me in 18 was talking about these abominable practices. So these are more of like those things that when Israelites would take over a certain city or group of people, they would take on the bad practices of those people, which God says don't fall into this again, putting something else in the place of God. And some of these are like really dark, like sorcerers or mediums.
Sacrificing your kids.
Yes, it's like so scary. And it's, to me, reading this is like, oh my gosh, why would that even be a thought in my mind to do this? But they fall into it.
God actually explains in Deuteronomy 18 that the reason I'm telling you not to do this is because the nations you're about to take possession of currently do this.
Yeah, so like, beware. But at the same time, it's just like, I don't understand how that would even be a thought. How is this even a temptation to do these things? But I don't know.
Remember, the Israelites taking the promised land is a two-part thing. It is God keeping his covenant with Abraham. Mm-hmm. He is giving them land. And the second part is he is judging the people for the 500-600 years of sin that they have just like spiraled into.
Mm-hmm.
So
the next part in chapter 18 really caused me to think. So I grew up in a church that was much more of like a, what would you call, like the brethren church?
That's exactly what you would call it.
No,
yeah.
but like that would be a much more,
they're Anabaptist.
like strict.
Yeah.
I don't know how to
It's
describe
not
it.
charismatic.
Okay, that might perhaps be a good way to put it. However, we now are at a church that would be much more charismatic. So this part that we just read in chapter 18, basically verses 15 to 22, it kind of struck me because I am not very used to hearing, like, for instance, in church, if somebody said, well, I have a word for you, or I heard this word and I just want to like proclaim it so that if it impacts anyone, like,
does not tend to happen in the Brethren in Christ Church very often.
It doesn't, like, at all. And I had grown up in that probably from like the age of like 6 until, I don't know, 20. Actually, we went to another Brethren in Christ Church too. Oh my gosh. So age 6 to probably like 28. So that's a very long time. And I was not used to hearing people speaking words that they had heard from the Lord. But what was really helpful to me, because sometimes I feel like you can get in these places where you're like, okay, is that from the Lord or is that just something rolling around in somebody's head? And when I read this, it was really helpful for me to like, okay, this is how we can understand this. So verse 20 says, if a prophet presumes to speak a word in my name, and I have not commanded him to speak, he who speaks the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. The next part is what I've really stuck with me. It says, and if you say in your heart, how may we know that the word the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. So I think that's like, it's so easy, but it's just like, oh, well, yeah, there we go. That makes a lot of sense. Like, if a word is spoken to you and nothing comes of it, then like, okay, that obviously wasn't from the Lord.
It seems to be a one strike and you're out policy.
Yeah, that too.
Uh-huh.
But it's interesting for me because I am not familiar with that. And it does kind of like, at times rub me the wrong way. But this is, I feel like, really good guidance for that. And it just makes sense too. I don't know, how do you, because you would have come from a similar background.
We'll get into a lot more of this kind of stuff when we get to Acts and the New Testament, where it is really valuable and people do hear from the Lord pretty unique things. And so I have always been classically trained. The Lord will not speak a word that he has not already spoken. What that means is if somebody tells you something and it doesn't match what's already been written in Scripture, that's not cool. Now that we have, like, I'm similar, like I grew up Mennonite for a long time. I think I was even still Mennonite when I was not in Mennonite churches, and actually probably still a little bit today.
Can't shake it.
And like the college we went to was like more reformed, I would say. And so now working in a pretty charismatic church, although it's funny, like charismatics see it as not very charismatic church. There is like people speak pretty powerful words over people, and I have seen like people be healed. I have seen people be like convicted by a word. I've seen people like speak a word over somebody that like nobody could have possibly told them that, or there's no way they could have known that. And it was very, very powerful and very, very important. So I have come from a place of like, I'm not really into that, to like, oh, okay, like God definitely does function in this way. I do think you can go like crazy on either side. Like you can just be like words all the time that are just like, I don't even know that does that word even mean anything? Or on the other side, like God doesn't speak anymore. God doesn't do that anymore. So I think it is important to be kind of in the middle. And I think this text is important. This text is saying like, hey, test the spirit of what that person is saying. And if that prophet is lying, don't listen to him anymore. And so, you know, I'm much more open to that kind of stuff than I would have been historically. But there is a part of me still that's like, I'm going to be kind of cautious about this. Like I'm allowed to, you know, flesh this out and see what the Lord is doing. Like I can hear from the Lord too. I
had a fantastic professor in graduate school, and one of her name was Penny. She was fantastic. Yeah. But she had a Penny-ism. And I wish I could remember the first part of it, but it basically was like when you confront a problem, it's always best to identify the truth and discern deception. That was like her big thing always. And for me, that's been helpful. Like, okay, is there truth to this? Or like, am I being deceived in some way? Is there some kind of deception here? And so that's been really helpful to me to try to remember, because I can be more cynical and just be like, nope, that's crazy, kind of like what you're talking.
And that's super dangerous.
Identify truth if it is there. And just
because these are faith-building things that cause you to understand that God is in fact moving and working in our day. And if you shut yourself off from that, I think you lose out on an aspect of who God is and what he's revealed in the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit is doing in us. And so words are powerful, but it's okay to discern them as well. I would say, like, actually in our own lives, we've had times where somebody spoke something to us and it was like, oh, wow, that was a really powerful word for us at that time. And that has meant a lot. So it's okay to test what somebody's saying. I would say if somebody's against you testing what they're saying, that's not a great thing. But there is some direction here for what prophets would do and what they can say and how you should treat them.
Well, then we move into chapter 20, which is talking all about laws about war. And so one thing that stuck out to me was if the people are fearful going into war, this is how you should speak or approach them, or speak to them or approach them. And it's really cool. In verse 3, it says, do not fear or panic or be in dread of the people that they would be opposing. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you, for you against your enemies to give you the victory. So that's like really, I mean, imagine you're like getting ready to go to war, and those are the words that are like in the law to tell you before you head out to war.
This is what David is going to remind. Okay. This is what David's going to remind the Israelites in front of Goliath. So David shows up and he's this tiny little dude, and the Israelite army is like terrified, and David's like, my God fights on behalf of us. Let's do this. So they are reminded that God fights on behalf of you, and you shouldn't be afraid. But then there's like 4 categories of people who are allowed to not fight if they don't want to. So it's like if you just planted...
The conscientious objector.
You're allowed to be a conscientious objector. That is not what this is.
No, I know.
If you just got married, you don't have to fight. If you're too afraid, you don't have to fight. If you are...
Something about your house. If you haven't dedicated your house.
Yeah, if you have a new house, basically, and if you have new planted crops.
Yeah.
So God has grace for people. Like, it's not like a you're going to fight or else kind of thing. It's like, oh, you seem too afraid. Why don't you go home? So I actually opened up with talking about why is it so important that we are distinct? Why do we have cultural distinctives? Why is it so important that we're not like everybody else? There is kind of an odd passage here, chapter 20, verse 19. When you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees. By wielding an axe against them, you may eat of them, but you shall not cut them down. That is a cultural distinctive.
Yeah, that really threw me off. I'm like, why does it matter if we're cutting down trees?
So what you would do when you besiege a city is you would cut down all the trees and use the trees to burn the city. And
oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. And so like a mark of ancient warfare would be that the trees are gone because they've been used to build siege works and destroy the city. And it destroys the ecosystem of the area. And God says to them, hey, you're not allowed to do that. And so it is a cultural distinctive. Like the Israelites were not allowed to cut all the trees down to make war. It sets them
apart to be like a little bit more like civil, if you will.
Well, I think 2 things go together. One is the Lord is going to do your fighting for you.
Right.
So you don't need to fight like everybody else because you have the Lord on your side. But it did set them apart. Now, like offering peace to the people, that's not necessarily unique. But there's several things in this 4-chapter thing that we read that are cultural distinctives. Like you're not allowed to do divination. People will be like talking to dead people. It actually works. You're not allowed to do it because God said you're not allowed to do it. And so there are things we read yesterday about like you can't cut yourself for the dead. You can't shave your head a certain way. There's many things that are cultural distinctives. And it is because we are set apart. Later on in the New Testament, it's going to say we are not part of this world. Like we don't belong to this world and this culture. We represent God. We are set apart as ambassadors for Christ today. And that's why it's important that we don't look like everybody else. And so there is like some really interesting debate to be had about that. Like, to what level do we get engaged in creating culture? I think there's some pretty compelling arguments there to be like involved in culture and setting the pace, but we need to be very careful that we don't end up just looking exactly like everybody else, which is probably part of the problem in mainstream Christianity today, where we're not super set apart. And so it's important to keep that intact. I understand we're not under the old covenant of the Old Testament. We're not the Israelites marching into the promised land. But God does still want us to be set apart to draw attention to himself. Like we live our best lives when we glorify God the most. And so part of that is being set apart and looking different.
Which honestly, I feel like you just kind of tapped into our part for today. Is that what you already said?
Yeah, I didn't actually say that. I forgot to say that, but yeah.
There you go. Ding, ding, ding.
So your part is like, whatever you're doing today, remember you are representing and honoring God with what you do. So you should actually look different in the way that you do it. The world that we live in does not honor God. And it is important that we do honor God with our lives and our choices and our decisions, all those kinds of things. So I hope you got something out of today. We'll be back again tomorrow with Deuteronomy 21 to 23. See you then.
Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to our take on God's Word. Stick around and listen to the Word on the second part of the podcast. Before we get in there, we just want to remind you, you can connect with us at any time on social media and YouTube at God's Plan, Your Part. Also, we are a listener-supported podcast, so if you ever want to help us out with the ministry that we're doing, you can do that by clicking the link in our description. And now, here's the reading for today. Deuteronomy chapter 17. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep in which is a blemish, any defect whatever, for this is an abomination to the Lord your God. If there is found among you within any of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun or the moon or any of the hosts of heaven which I have forbidden, and it is told you and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stones. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If any case arises requiring a decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault and another, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place the Lord your God will choose. And you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you from that place that the Lord will choose. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you. According to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they declare to you, either to the right hand or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest, who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or to judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear, and not act presumptuously again. When you come to the land that Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all nations have around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of the law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. The Levitical priests, all the tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the Lord's food offerings as their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance, as he promised them. And this shall be the priest's due from the people. From those offering a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep, they shall give to the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the stomach, the first fruits of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the first fleece of your sheep you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons for all time. And if a Levite comes from any of your towns out of all Israel where he lives, and he may come when he desires, to the place that the Lord will choose, and ministers in the name of the Lord his God, like all his fellow Levites who stand to minister there before the Lord, then he may have equal portions to eat, besides what he receives from the sale of his patrimony. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow an abominable practice of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you are about to dispossess listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of assembly, when you said, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, They are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words, that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, the same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, How may we know that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him.
When the Lord your God cuts off the nation whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and dwell in their cities and in their houses, you shall set apart 3 cities for yourselves in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall measure the distances and divide it into 3 parts, the area of the land that the Lord your God has given you as a possession, so that any manslayer can flee to them. This is the provision for the manslayer, who by fleeing there may save his life. If anyone kills his neighbor unintentionally without having hated him in the past, as when someone goes into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he may flee to one of those cities and live, lest the avenger of blood in hot anger pursue the manslayer and overtake him, because the way is long, and strike him fatally, though the man did not deserve to die, since he had not hated his neighbor in the past. Therefore I command you, you shall set apart 3 cities. And if the Lord your God enlarges your territory, as he has sworn to your fathers, and gives you all the land that he promised to give your fathers, provided you are careful to keep all the commandment which I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, and by walking ever in his ways, then you shall add 3 other cities to these 3, lest innocent blood be shed in your land, and the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, and so the guilt of the bloodshed be upon you. But if anyone hates his neighbor, and lies in wait for him, and attacks him, and strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, then the elders of the city shall send and take him from there, and hand him over to the avenger of blood, so that he may die. Your eyes shall not pity him, but you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, so that it may be well with you. You shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set, in the inheritance that you will hold in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests, and before the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness, and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he meant to do to his brother. So shall you purge the evil from your midst. And the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. When you go out to war against your enemies, and see horses and chariots, and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people, and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, Is there any man who has built a house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man enjoy its fruit. And is there any man who has a betrothed wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man take her. And all the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. And when the officers have finished speaking to the people, then commanders shall be appointed at the head of the people. When you draw near to the city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And if it responds to you peacefully and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock, and everything else in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as a plunder for yourselves. And you shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here, but in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. Then when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Are the trees in the field human that they should be besieged by you? Only the trees that you know are not trees for food you may destroy and cut down, that you may build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it falls.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.